This is Josh Herbert's informative speech on the 2016 World Series, accompanied by a couple special guests. Number 1, Kyle Bryan. Number 2, cameraman Jordan Troy. And number 3, Austin Miner. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Jordan now. All right, so my introduction is 2016 World Series was one that we haven't seen in quite some time. It was a matchup between the Chicago Cubs and the Cleveland Indians. The Chicago Cubs entered with a 108-year championship drought, and the Indians entered with a 68-year drought. So they're both being the longest in sports. It's also interesting for another reason that the Cubs entered the year with World Series expectations, and the Indians, on the other hand, did not. All right, so my main point, number 1, is going to be the Cleveland Indians. Sub-point is going to talk about the 2016 season, how they got to the World Series, their 68-year drought, and individual players such as Lindor, Kluber, and Andrew Miller. Point number 2 is going to be the Chicago Cubs, their 2016 season, how they got there, their 108-year drought, their individual players such as Bryant, Rizzo, and Chapman. The third point will be Game 7 of the World Series. Sub-points being Corey Kluber, third pitcher ever to start 3 World Series games. Dexter Fowler leadoff home run. Rajai Davis game-tying home run. The rain delay, and the Cubs closed the deal. All right, so the Cleveland Indians, they entered the season at 26-1 odds to win the World Series, ranking them 17th in the MLB at the beginning of the season. And they haven't won since 1948, spanning 68 years. They finished the regular season champs as AL Central champions with a record of 94-67. They battled major injury issues all season long. They didn't have Michael Brantley, who's one of their star outfielders, and they lost a lot of pitchers in Danny Salazar and Carlos Carrasco. At the trade deadline, they made a big move to get relief pitcher Andrew Miller from the Yankees, who was arguably the best available player at the deadline. Corey Kluber, Francisco Lindor, and Terry Francona all had exceptional years, ranking them with talks in their own respective positions, their awards for that position. Okay. The Chicago Cubs. The Chicago Cubs entered the season with 5-1 odds to win the World Series, ranking them number 1 in the MLB. They owned a championship drought of 108 years, which was the longest active streak by over 40 years, which was next to the Indians. They even owned the nickname the Lovable Losers because of the great support that their fans gave them, even through all the losing. So you have such things as the Billy Goat curse, which the Cubs fans like to talk about, and Steve Bartman also. They won the NL Central Division with a record of 103-58. They had high expectations from the beginning of the season, so nothing except the World Series was going to be accepted in the Cubs world. They're doing it with the youngest team in baseball, actually. Behind superstars is Chris Bryant, who's 24 years old, and Anthony Rizzo, who's 27 years old. So both of them are also in the conversation with NL MVP and a possible split between the two. So it would be a shared award for both. Bryant would win the MVP and Rizzo would win the MVP. They're managed by Joe Madden, who's also in talks with NL Manager of the Year. They also acquired Aroldis Chapman from the New York Yankees, the same team as Andrew Miller, and he's thrown the fastest pitch ever recorded at 105.1 miles an hour. Pretty incredible. Game 7 of World Series was a game that we haven't seen in quite some time. The World Series had over 35 million viewers, the most in over 20 years. It got to Game 7 after the Indians were up 3-1. They couldn't close the deal in Game 5 at Wrigley, and then Game 6 in Cleveland. The Cubs also won. So Dexter Fowler became the first person to ever hit a leadoff home run in Game 7, which was pitched by Corey Kluber, who became the third person ever to pitch 3 games in a World Series. The Indians were down big. They were down, which was a 4-run deficit at one point. They closed the gap and They got a unlikely home run from an unlikely candidate in Raji Davis, which sent the crowd going crazy, the whole city. There's even a pretty